The sound was almost imperceptible, a soft, digital chime from my old iPhone. It pierced the thick silence of the condo, a silence otherwise broken only by the rhythmic purr of Marcus, my cat curled up on my lap, and the whisper of rain against the windowpane. August in Oregon was always like this, unpredictable, melancholic, as if the sky itself couldn't decide if it was summer or fall. I slid my glasses to the tip of my nose and picked up the phone. It was a text from Carol, my neighbor from the book club. No words, just a link with a short phrase beneath it. Thinking of you, Evelyn. Hang in there. Odd. I'd just seen Carol 2 days ago when we were discussing the new Immortals novel. She knew I didn't have any procedures scheduled this week. Her hang in there felt out of place, like a sour note in a well-played melody. I frowned, a prickle of unease so faint it could have been a draft. Sensing the tension in my hands, Marcus shifted, his purr faltering. I stroked him behind the ears, and the gentle rumble resumed, restoring a fragile equilibrium to the room. I locked the phone and set it on the side table. I'd deal with it later. It was time for tea. My world had become small after Frank died and the kids moved away. At first, the compactness was frightening, but I'd grown to find comfort in it. I sold our big, lonely house in the suburbs and moved into this 2-bedroom condo overlooking a stand of evergreen Douglas firs. My life was governed by rituals. Morning coffee from Frank's old French press. An afternoon walk to the library, if I had the strength. Evenings with a book, Marcus, and a cup of chamomile tea. I am Evelyn Ross, 63 years old, a retired librarian, a widow, a mother of 2 grown children, and, more recently, the recipient of a diagnosis that people only speak of in hushed, sympathetic tones. My life had been a catalog, neatly organized on its shelves, genres, authors, decades. I knew where everything belonged. Order was my way of managing the chaos that always threatened to seep in at the edges. Even now, pouring hot water into my teapot, I watched the dried chamomile flowers swirl, creating their own predictable pattern. It was calming. In a world where your own cells could rebel without reason, predictability was a luxury. The diagnosis had come 6 months ago, in a sterile white office overlooking a parking lot. Cancer. The word was ugly, jagged. It didn't fit into my orderly world. The doctor talked about stages, protocols, survival rates. I listened and nodded, but a single thought drowned out everything else, deafening in its simplicity. The book of my life was nearing its end, and I didn't even know how many pages were left in the final chapter. Life split into before and after. Before was filled with retirement plans, road trips to national parks, volunteering, maybe even a clumsy attempt at dating again. After became a schedule of oncology appointments, of counting the days between chemo infusions, of studying pamphlets on side effects. Fatigue became my constant companion, not the pleasant ache after a day of gardening, but a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion, as if life itself were being slowly siphoned out of me. I'd learned to live with it, the way you learn to live with a noisy neighbor, ignoring it when possible, gritting your teeth when not. My Medicare plan covered most of the bills, and the savings from the house sale provided a cushion. I was managing. Or so I told myself. My phone vibrated again. This time, the smiling face of my niece, Ashley, lit up the screen. I answered, and the room filled with her bright, sunny voice. Aunt Evie, how are you? How did the appointment with Dr. Atkins go yesterday? Ashley was my late sister's daughter, a bright spark in our family. 25, she worked in what she called social media, a world of trends, virality, and engagement, words as foreign to me as the medical terms on my charts. But beneath the modern jargon, she was a kind, caring girl. Since my diagnosis, she'd called almost every day. Everything's on track, honey, I said, trying to make my voice sound stronger than I felt. The blood work is stable. Next round is in 2 weeks. That's great news, she chirped. Listen, I'll be in your neighborhood tomorrow. I'll stop by in the afternoon. Need me to pick anything up from Whole Foods? Your favorite ginger tea. A warmth spread through my chest. In a world where my own children were consumed by their careers and families in other states, sending dutiful weekly texts, Ashley's attention was an anchor. She helped me pay bills online, set up my new laptop, and patiently explained how to use FaceTime. I trusted her implicitly. She was family. Thank you, sweetie. I don't need a thing. Just your company. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, smiling. The unease from Carol's text had all but vanished. I walked into the living room. On the old oak table I'd saved from the move lay my main project for the past few months. I called it the Ross Family Cookbook. It wasn't just a collection of instructions for my mother's apple pie or Frank's Sunday roast. I was pasting in old photographs, writing down the stories behind each dish, adding notes about why my grandfather always put a pinch of nutmeg in his gravy. This was my legacy. My way of passing down something that couldn't be digitized or turned into a trend. A piece of our history, the warmth of family dinners, the sound of laughter around a table. I was making 2 copies, one for my son, Michael, and one for my daughter, Linda. I wanted their children, my grandchildren, to one day open this book and feel a connection to the roots they barely knew. I picked up my fountain pen and, in the looping cursive I'd been taught half a century ago, began to write out the recipe for lemon pound cake. I wrote about how my sister, Ashley's mother, and I used to bake it as kids, getting flour all over ourselves and sneaking licks of the sweet batter. The memory was so vivid and warm that for a moment I forgot about the rain, the illness in my body, everything but the scent of lemon zest and the sound of carefree laughter. I worked until dusk settled in. Evening descended on the city. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the clean smell of wet pavement and ozone. I had a small bowl of soup for dinner, watched the PBS NewsHour, which only deepened my sense of gloom, and decided on an early night. The fatigue was rolling in like a heavy fog. As I was clearing my cup, I saw the phone on the side table again. Carol's message. I'd almost forgotten. It was probably nothing, another article about some miracle anti-cancer diet she was fond of sending me, always with the best intentions. But something about her words, thinking of you, still bothered me. It was like a splinter in my mind, small but irritating. With a heavy sigh, I picked up the phone. Marcus jumped down from the armchair and rubbed against my legs, demanding attention. I absently stroked his back and opened the message again. My thumb hovered over the link for a few seconds. Just click it, Evelyn, and get it over with. What's the worst that could happen? I clicked it. The page loaded. It was a GoFundMe. The platform's bright, optimistic interface was familiar. I donated to an animal shelter through the site once. But this page was different. At the top, there was a picture. A picture of me. It had been taken a few weeks ago. I was dozing in my recliner by the window, covered with a quilt. The light was hitting me at an angle that highlighted every wrinkle, every shadow under my eyes. I looked pale, exhausted, and fragile. Ashley had snapped it on her phone, saying, "Oh, Aunt Evie, you look so peaceful, like an angel." I never imagined that angel would have such a wide audience. Beneath the photo, a headline in big, cheerful letters, "Help our Aunt Evie kick cancers," but I felt the blood drain from my face. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. My fingers went cold. I started reading the text, supposedly written by me but in Ashley's voice, full of exclamation points and emojis. It was a sickeningly sweet tale of my brave battle, of what an incredible warrior I was. It contained twisted details of my treatment, hinting at uncovered experimental therapies that could be my salvation. Lies. All of it. And then I saw the numbers. Goal: $50,000. Raised: $8,342. Below the progress bar was a list of donors. The names of my former colleagues, my neighbors, distant relatives, my friends from the book club. Carol. Her donation was one of the largest. Now her message made a horrifying kind of sense. My world narrowed to the glowing screen. A roaring sound filled my ears, like the ocean. My whole life, my quiet, orderly, private life, my illness, my vulnerability, had been turned inside out, packaged into a pity-inducing story, and put up for sale. Ashley, my sweet, caring Ashley, who had called an hour ago to ask if I needed tea, had done this. She had turned my tragedy into her project. The warm, loving grandmother who had just been tenderly writing out a recipe for lemon pound cake died in that moment. I felt it physically, a sensation of something inside me growing cold and hard, like granite. There was no rage. There were no tears. There was only an icy, deafening void. I closed the page. I placed the phone screen down on the table. I walked to the oak table where my nearly finished cookbook lay. I looked at it for a long moment, at the neat cursive, the pasted-in photos, the love poured onto its pages. Then I pushed it aside. I picked up a clean, college-ruled notepad, the kind I kept for tax records, and a new pen. I opened it to the first page. My hand was perfectly steady. In the silence of the condo, broken only by the distant wail of a siren, I made my first entry. For the first hour after sunset, I just sat in silence, staring at the blank page of my notepad. The pen I was holding felt foreign, heavy, and cold. The world outside my window went on with its life. Headlights of passing cars slid across my ceiling. In a nearby apartment, people were laughing. But inside the walls of my sanctuary, time had stopped. The air was static, dense. Every breath was an effort. The icy numbness that had followed the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a tremor. It started deep in my chest and radiated outward in waves, making my fingertips vibrate. I tried to take a sip of my cold tea, but the cup chattered against my teeth. I set it down, spilling a little on the table. The drops spread across the wood like tears. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the GoFundMe page returned. The smiling, sympathetic faces of the donors. The ugly photograph of me, asleep and helpless. The upbeat, fraudulent words Ashley had written. I saw her face, heard her voice, but now, behind the familiar mask of concern, I saw something predatory and calculating. Every kind gesture from the past 6 months, every box of ginger tea, every offer to help with the laptop, every encouraging call now seemed like a part of a single, monstrous performance. Had there been any truth to her worry? Or was I just a project, an opportunity from the very start? I got up and walked to the window. The city was a carpet of lights, each one a window into someone's life, someone's story. For the first time in years, I felt completely, irrevocably alone. Not just a widow or a mother with distant children. I was an island, and the shoreline I had thought was closest had just crumbled into the sea. The betrayal wasn't about the money. The money was just the vulgar instrument. The betrayal was in how she had taken my most private struggle, my fight for my life, and turned it into a public commodity, into content. She hadn't stolen my money. She had stolen my story, rewriting it to suit her narrative. The sunrise came without any splendor, a flat, joyless gray like a hospital sheet. I met it with empty eyes and a heart that felt as hard and cold as a river stone. In the morning, I made myself drink a cup of coffee. The hot bitterness cleared my head a little. No more passivity. No more emotion. It was time for facts. The librarian in me, the part of my mind that had spent decades systematically organizing information, woke up and took control. The chaos had to be cataloged. I sat at my oak table, opened my laptop, and returned to the GoFundMe page. This time, I looked at it not as a victim, but as a researcher. I created a new, password-protected folder on my desktop. The title was simple, Case File AR. The first thing I did was start taking screenshots. Methodically, one after another. The main page with my photo. The text, which I forced myself to reread, noting every false claim, every hyperbole. The donor list sorted by date and amount. The comments section. Evelyn, you were always such a fighter. Praying for you, wrote Mary from my old neighborhood. Hang in there, dear. Sending positive vibes from a distant cousin in Arizona. Every dollar helps in this battle. You go, warrior. From someone I didn't even know. Each comment was a small, sharp sting. They thought they were helping me. Their kindness, their empathy, had been intercepted and used as fuel for this fraud. I saved the screenshots with precise file names. Comment_Mary_Johnson_08. 12/2025, PNG. Then I studied Ashley's text. I recognized her professional touch. This wasn't just an emotional plea. This was a calculated social media campaign. She used keywords designed for maximum response: brave battle, warrior, last chance, crippling medical bills. She'd created a story, simple and tear-jerking, perfect for viral sharing. She'd even added updates, short posts about my alleged condition. The most recent one was from 2 days ago. Aunt Evie is feeling especially weak today, but her fighting spirit is strong. Thank you for your support. It gives her strength. On that day, I had felt better than I had in weeks and spent 3 hours tending to my balcony garden. The lie wasn't just incidental. It was structural. An emotional, furious reaction was exactly what she would expect. It would fit her script. Poor Aunt Evie, she's so sick. Her mind is clouded. She doesn't understand that we're just trying to help her. I was not going to play that part. My first move had to be cold, precise, and completely unexpected. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. In the to field, I typed Ashley's address. My hands were trembling slightly, but I willed them to be still. For several minutes, I stared at the blinking cursor, choosing my words like a chemist choosing reagents for a controlled reaction. Every word had to be neutral. Every word had to be true. Subject: a question body. Dearest Ashley, a friend sent me a link to a GoFundMe page this morning. It features my photograph and discusses my health situation. I'm sure there's a simple explanation, but I don't recall ever discussing this with you. Could you please clarify? Love, and Evie, the word love was the hardest part. It felt like ash in my mouth. But it was necessary. It maintained the mask of normalcy. It gave her no grounds to accuse me of aggression. I reread the email 5 times. It was perfect. Polite, detached, and surgically precise. I clicked send and felt a chill run down my spine. The first stone had been cast. Now I just had to wait for the ripples. The reply came after an agonizing 43 minutes. In that time, I managed to wash every dish in the sink and repot a ficus. The notification of a new email made my heart leap into my throat. The response was exactly what I'd expected. A tsunami of exclamation points, emojis, and weaponized affection. OMG, Aunt Evie. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to raise a little money so you wouldn't have to worry about bills and could hire some help or buy yourself something nice. All our friends and family were so worried, they wanted to help. I was just trying to organize all their love for you. I am so sorry if this came across the wrong way. I only wanted the best. Please don't be mad. I read it and I felt no anger. Only a cold, crystalline clarity. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She was trying to reframe it, to cast herself as the victim of a misunderstanding and me as ungrateful. She had confirmed my worst fears. She thought I was old, stupid, and helpless. Ashley's reply broke the last dam inside me. I pushed back from the table, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out the heavy, leather-bound photo album. The one I hadn't opened in years. The smell of old paper and glue hit me. I flipped through the pages, past pictures of my childhood, my wedding to Frank, the birth of my children. I was looking for one photo in particular. There it was. My sister, Sarah, Ashley's mother, and me. We were in our early 20s, perched on the hood of my father's old Chevy, squinting in the summer sun, both of us with silly haircuts and identical, happy smiles. Sarah. My big sister, my best friend. Cancer had taken her 15 years ago, swiftly and without mercy. The memory washed over me with such force it took my breath away. Sarah's last days in hospice. The smell of antiseptic. My sister's pale, drawn face against the pillow. And our last conversation. She had taken my hand with her thin, almost transparent fingers and whispered, "Promise me, Evie. Promise me you'll look after my little girl. Ashley will be all alone. Promise me." And I had promised. I'll always be there for her, Sarah. Always. She'll be like a daughter to me. I closed the album. A few hot tears finally escaped and traced paths down my cheeks. Ashley's betrayal wasn't just a deceit. It was a desecration of her mother's memory. It was the violation of a deathbed vow. All these years, I had tried to keep that promise. I was at every birthday, her graduation, helped her move into her first apartment. I had loved her not just as a niece, but as a living piece of my sister. And she had taken that love, that bond, that sacred promise, and monetized it. The tears dried. In their place was a scorched emptiness. This was no longer just a matter of principle. It was a matter of honor. Of my honor to my dead sister. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I would not argue with Ashley. I would not appeal to her conscience, because she clearly didn't have one. I would act. I returned to the table. The emotions were packed away and stored in the furthest corner of my mind. It was time for logic and strategy. My mind began to work with the same methodical precision I used to use when creating bibliographic records. She used a digital platform. Therefore, the platform has rules. She collected money through payment systems. Therefore, this falls under financial laws. She did this in the state of Oregon. Therefore, she was breaking the laws of the state of Oregon. I opened my web browser. My fingers flew across the keyboard. GoFundMe terms of service misrepresentation, reporting fraudulent campaign GoFundMe, Oregon revised statutes wire fraud, theft by deception Oregon penalties. I read through legal jargon, fine print, and case precedents. Hour after hour, I immersed myself in a world that was completely alien to me, but whose logic I understood. I learned that creating a campaign on behalf of someone else, without their express consent, was a direct violation of GoFundMe's terms of service. I learned that raising funds under false pretenses, mentioning experimental treatments, could be prosecuted as fraud. I found the Multnomah County District Attorney's website and its portal for reporting economic crimes. The world no longer seemed chaotic. It had rules again. And I was going to use every single one of them. I was no longer a victim. I was a researcher, gathering evidence for my most important project yet. Before I took the next step, I needed an outside perspective. Not an emotional one, but a professional one. I could call a lawyer, but that was expensive and premature. I had someone better. I dialed Martha Hendricks. Martha and I had worked at the Central Library for over 20 years, she in the legal reference department. In retirement, she'd kept her razor-sharp mind and her complete intolerance for nonsense. Martha? It's Evelyn. Evie, haven't heard from you in an age. You sound like you just swallowed the state penal code. What's wrong? I smiled for the first time in 2 days. You're not far off. I laid out the situation for her. Calmly, dispassionately, presenting only the facts, figures, and dates as if I were reading a report. Martha listened without interrupting, occasionally making a soft sound. When I finished, she was silent for a few seconds. Okay, she said finally, and her voice was steel. That little brat didn't just cross a line, Evie. She committed a crime. You have screenshots? Everything I said. Comments, amounts, the text, the updates. All time-stamped. Good. Did you give her power of attorney? Access to your bank accounts? Never. Excellent. Here's what you do, Evie. First, and most important, you do not speak to her or write to her again. Total radio silence. Any contact is just an opportunity for her to manipulate you. Second, don't threaten her or try to shame her. Just act. Third, you have 2 avenues. The platform and the law. You pursue both. Simultaneously. Her confidence was contagious. She had confirmed everything I had concluded on my own. Thank you, Martha. I needed to hear that. Don't thank me. Just have me over for some of that lemon pound cake when this is all over. And bring the paperwork. I love reading a well-drafted complaint. After talking to Martha, I had a clear plan. I spent the rest of the day executing it. It was quiet, focused work, almost meditative. I was turning my pain into a weapon made of paper and digital files. First, I opened a word processor and wrote a formal statement to the GoFundMe Trust and Safety team. I used their own terminology from their terms of service. Campaign created without the beneficiary's knowledge or consent contains demonstrably false and misleading information regarding my medical condition and financial needs, constitutes a misuse of the platform. I attached the most damning screenshots to the email. Next, I drafted a second letter. This one was addressed to the Economic Crimes Unit of the District Attorney's Office. This letter was even drier, more formal. I cited the specific Oregon state statutes I believed had been violated. I outlined the facts, attached a digital copy of my ID, and provided a detailed timeline of events. No emotion. No mention of a broken heart or a betrayed sister. Just the facts. A, B, C. When both documents were ready, I printed everything. I took a new binder and carefully organized all the materials in sections: correspondence with A, R, GoFundMe evidence, official statements. The binder, thick with paper, was the physical embodiment of my resolve. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a case. Case file AR. And I was the lead investigator, prosecutor, and plaintiff. Night fell again. But this night was different. It held no paralyzing terror. It held the silence before a storm. My home was once again my fortress, my headquarters. On my laptop screen were 2 open windows, my email client with 2 drafted messages ready to go, and the case file AR folder. Everything was ready. 1 click. A single mouse click to set in motion a machine that could not be stopped. A machine that would, most likely, shatter what was left of my family forever. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Where was the soft, slightly naive Evelyn who baked cakes and believed in the good in people? Staring back at me was a woman with hard lines around her mouth and cold, clear eyes. A woman who had learned that order in the world isn't a given. It has to be fought for. I knew this step would cost me dearly. It would cost me my niece, the last warm memories of my sister, maybe even relationships with other family members who would call me vengeful and cruel. They wouldn't understand. They hadn't been there. But it was too late to turn back. A betrayal of this magnitude couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. It could only be stopped. To protect not just myself, but all the good people whose compassion had been so cynically exploited. Even when it felt like everything was lost, I hadn't given up. Because sometimes, the only thing you have left is the right to justice. My hand rested on the mouse. My finger hovered over the button. My finger hovered over the left mouse button. For one infinitely long moment, the room disappeared, and I was in a complete silence, the vacuum of my own decision. There were 2 paths before me. One was the path of forgiveness and forgetting, a quiet road paved with bitterness, where I would silently swallow the betrayal to preserve the fragile facade of family unity. The other was the path of truth, cold, sharp, and as irreversible as a surgeon's scalpel. I thought of my sister Sarah. What would she have said? Would she have asked me to spare her daughter, to forgive her lost soul? Maybe. But she also would have wanted her daughter to live an honest life. And honesty cannot grow in the soil of unpunished deceit. I took a quiet, shuddering breath and pressed the button. The click of the mouse was barely audible, a dry, insignificant sound. But in the silence of my condo, it sounded like a gunshot. I sent the first email to GoFundMe. Then, without a second's hesitation, the second to the district attorney's office. Another click. 2 shots fired into the night. 2 digital ghosts sent out into the world to begin their work. I pushed back from the table. There was no trembling in my body, no relief. Just a void. A vast, ringing emptiness where love and trust had been only 3 days before. I closed the laptop. It was done. The first domino had been pushed. All I could do now was wait for the last one to fall and see what remained of the world I once knew. The next few days passed in a fog. I moved through my apartment like an automaton, performing my rituals, brewing tea, feeding Marcus, staring out the window, but my mind was elsewhere. I was waiting. And in that waiting, I replayed my actions again and again, dissecting them to understand if I'd had any other choice. To understand why I had chosen the harshest path. Many would call it revenge. The cruelty of a bitter old woman. But it wasn't. Revenge is a hot, irrational emotion. My decision was as cold as ice. It was born not from a desire to inflict pain, but from the necessity to restore order. I walked to the photo album, still lying on the dresser. I opened it to the picture of Sarah. Her smiling face from the past looked out at me, and I began a silent dialogue with her, explaining what I could never explain to others. First, it was a betrayal not just of money, but of self. Ashley took my illness, my fear, my vulnerability, the most intimate parts of my life, and turned them into a carefully directed performance to gather likes and donations. She put my pain in a shop window and slapped a price tag on it. To forgive that would be to agree that my life, my personhood, had no value beyond what could be measured in dollars in a fundraising campaign. I could not allow that. Second, it was a betrayal of your legacy, Sarah. You left me the most precious thing you had, your daughter. And I promised to protect her. But protecting her doesn't mean enabling her. Protecting her means teaching her accountability. By letting her get away with this, I would have failed you a second time. I would have taught her that lies, manipulation, and the exploitation of another's suffering are acceptable tools for getting what you want. I would have let her believe that nothing is sacred, not family ties, not the vows made to the dying. And third, and most important, Ashley didn't just deceive me. She deceived Carol, Mary, and dozens of other people who opened their hearts and their wallets, genuinely wanting to help. She preyed on their goodness. Their compassion was just a resource to her. If I had stayed silent, I would have become an accomplice to their deception. I would have allowed her to believe that she could continue to parasitize the best of human qualities. It was then that I understood the terrifying metaphor. The cancer growing in my body was an uncontrolled division of cells. It ignored the body's rules, consuming resources for its own selfish growth. What Ashley did, her deceit, her narcissism, her complete lack of remorse, was the same thing. It was a social cancer, a moral tumor. And you don't negotiate with a disease like that. You don't try to reason with it. You don't try to understand and forgive it, hoping it will go away on its own. You cut it out, cleanly, decisively, and completely, to stop it from metastasizing. My actions weren't revenge. They were a necessary, though painful, surgery. The first response came after 36 hours. An email from the GoFundMe Trust and Safety Team. The language was formal, dispassionate. Dear Mrs. Ross, we have received your report. The campaign has been temporarily suspended while we conduct an internal review. We may be in contact for additional information, temporarily suspended. It was the first confirmation that the system was working. I felt not joy, but a grim satisfaction. The wheels of justice, however slowly, were beginning to turn. 2 hours later, the phone rang. I saw Ashley on the screen and braced myself. Aunt Evie? Her voice was unrecognizable. The usual sweetness was replaced by the metallic ring of panic and barely concealed fury. What's going on? Why is my GoFundMe frozen? They sent me an email saying there was a complaint. Did you do this? I paused for a beat, letting her words hang in the air. Yes, Ashley. I did. But why? I explained it. I was doing it for you. To help you. Her voice cracked into a shriek. There it was. The lie she had rehearsed so well. Ashley, my voice was level and calm, which I knew would make it sound even more terrifying. You created that campaign without my knowledge. You lied about my condition. You lied about my financial needs. And you lied to dozens of people who donated their money. That isn't help. That is fraud. There was silence on the other end of the line. She clearly hadn't expected such a direct assault. I'll give the money back if that's what you want. Just withdraw the complaint. Pleading notes crept into her voice. That's no longer in my power, I said, feeling the ice inside me harden. I believe you should direct your questions to the GoFundMe team. And soon, perhaps, to the district attorney's office. I heard her sharp, strangled gasp. And before she could unleash a torrent of curses or tears, I ended the call. The conversation was over. For good. The next few weeks were the longest of my life. I existed in a state of suspension, waiting for news. I received a few more emails from GoFundMe, answering their clarifying questions. Then a call from a detective in the Economic Crimes Unit. A polite young man named Officer Riley. I calmly and thoroughly told him the entire story, referencing my notes. And then, one rainy September afternoon, 2 official letters arrived in the mail. The first was from GoFundMe. It stated that their investigation was complete. The campaign had been deemed fraudulent and was permanently removed from the platform. All donations, down to the last cent, would be refunded to the donors within 5 to 7 business days. They offered their apologies for the experience. The second letter was on Multnomah County letterhead. It was a formal notice from the district attorney's office. In dry legalese, it informed me that based on their investigation, charges were being filed against Ashley and Carter on 2 counts, theft by deception and wire fraud. I held the 2 letters in my hands. This was it. Justice. In black and white. The system had worked. I had won. But I felt no joy. Only a profound weight. The unbearable weight of having had to do this at all. That evening, my son Michael called from Chicago. His voice was tense. "Mom, my cousin just called me. He said Ashley is in some kind of legal trouble, and that you're involved. What the hell is going on?" And so I told him. I told him everything, holding nothing back. When I finished, Michael was quiet for a long time. "God, Mom," he said finally, and his voice was a mixture of shock and something else, something that sounded like respect. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone." And in that moment, I realized I had accomplished something. I had gotten my voice back. There was no trial. As Martha had predicted, Ashley took a plea bargain to avoid one. She pleaded guilty. The sentence was light, given that the money had been returned, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory attendance in a financial ethics course. She now had a criminal record. A stain that would follow her for years, especially in her digital-focused career. The family ties, already frayed, snapped completely. Some relatives, mostly on Ashley's father's side, stopped speaking to me, believing I had ruined a young girl's life over some money. They didn't want the truth. They preferred the simpler story of the cruel old aunt. My own children, Michael and Linda, by contrast, began to call more often, their voices filled with a new kind of warmth and concern. It was as if this ordeal had forced them to see the mother they thought was so quiet and predictable in a new light. One day at the grocery store, I ran into Carol. She looked embarrassed. "Evelyn, I got the refund from GoFundMe. And I feel so foolish. I should have called you first." "It's all right, Carol," I said, and it was the truth. "You were acting from a place of kindness." That's what she was counting on. She nodded, relief and understanding in her eyes. "What you did, that was very brave." I just shrugged. It wasn't about being brave. It was about what was necessary. Months passed. Fall gave way to winter. My treatment continued, with its ups and downs, but the cancer was no longer the central drama of my life. I had faced something worse, betrayal. And I had survived. One evening, while browsing a local community forum online, I saw another link to a fundraiser. This time for a child with a rare disease. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. How many of these stories were true, and how many weren't? How could you tell real hardship from cynical manipulation? And then I knew what I had to do. The librarian in me, the one who had spent a lifetime helping people find the right information, had one last mission. I sat down at my laptop and started to write. I didn't write about myself. I created a guide. How to verify a fundraiser before you donate. A guide for good-hearted people. I broke it down into simple, clear points. Direct contact. If you know the person the funds are for, contact them directly by phone or in person. Confirm they are aware of and have consented to the campaign. Check the organizer. If the campaign is organized by a friend or relative, ask yourself if you trust that person's judgment and integrity. Look for specifics. Vague phrases like, "for medical bills," are a red flag. Legitimate campaigns often name a specific clinic, procedure, or medication. Beware of emotional pressure. Fraudulent campaigns often use highly emotional language, superlatives, bravest, most amazing, and create a false sense of urgency. Reverse image search. Use a search engine to check the photos used in the campaign. Scammers sometimes pull images from the internet. I wrote several more points based on my bitter experience. When I was finished, I posted it on the forum. Anonymously. Just a helpful tip from a neighbor. Within hours, there were dozens of comments thanking me. People wrote that they'd never thought about these things. My story, my pain, had been transformed into something useful. Into knowledge that could protect others. It was the best ending I could have hoped for. It is quiet in my condo now. But it's a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of peaceful routine, but the quiet of deliberate solitude. I still brew my tea. Marcus still sleeps on my lap. But something has changed forever. On my oak table sits the unfinished Ross family cookbook. I haven't touched it since that night. I'm not sure I ever will. Some stories are too painful to write. Some ingredients are spoiled for good. I don't regret what I did. Justice isn't a warm, satisfying feeling of victory. It's a cold, impartial procedure. Sometimes, to save the garden, you have to uproot a diseased tree, even if it once gave you shade and flowers. Sometimes, to heal, you have to perform surgery and cut away the part of you that has been poisoned, even if you once loved it. I won my battle, but this isn't a happy ending. It's just the end of a chapter. I don't know how many pages are left in my book, but I know this. I will be the one to write them. Honestly. Without falsehoods. And no one will ever steal my story again.